All right. So I am Dewitt Scott, Student Success Specialist at Moraine Valley Community College, longtime book lover, book nerd, all around square, corny guy. And I am with a very intelligent colleague of mine, and I'll let you give your name.
Okay. I'm Hannah Carlton. I'm a librarian at Moraine Valley, also a book lover, so much that I, made it a career, somewhat in some ways. But yes, okay.
Yes, so just briefly, I think our love of books, yours and mine, sort of brought us together here through the Moraine Reads. I know you're working in the library, so you actually see all of the uploaded Moraine Reads videos and you post them to the social media and to the library website. And I think we crossed paths earlier in the fall semester, and we sort of understood our deep appreciation for books, and we came up with this idea.
Yeah, I see Dewitt just posting another video every week, and I am inspired by this.
And so what better way to, I guess I would say promote literacy and to get more and more people engaged in reading in the written word than to get two book lovers together to talk about books that they love. So I'm glad that we're doing this.
Me too. I will talk about books all day, any day.
Okay, so we can actually, let's open up for today. We are talking about one of the more popular books in the book world, Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And so I think we should open up first. I'll let you go first in describing where you were when you were introduced to the book. What was your thinking at that time, and what did you get out of it, and where you are now in comparison to that moment when you first came across the book?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I first read this book. It's like 3 years ago now. I think it was in like 2018, somewhere early-ish in 2018. Okay. And I was in my first year of library school, getting my master's degree. And kind of where I was right then, it's like, so I got into, I spent a couple of years volunteering at public libraries, and that kind of turned into a job in a public library where I was helping community members use the computers and technology available at the library. And I loved it. Being working with people who didn't really have an access or understanding to some of the technology that we take for granted every day. I saw every hour I did a little step towards helping to a very little step, but little step towards helping to, mitigate the digital divide. And that was like, I loved it. And so I went to library school so that I could keep doing it and do it more and better. Mm-hmm. In libraries, because libraries are, especially public libraries, are key to bridging gaps in technology access. Just out there on my soapbox, support your public library because it's doing amazing work.
Yes.
From a librarian, just. But so I went to library school thinking, oh, I want to keep doing this and working with people around technology and digital literacy in public libraries. And it was one of those things where I had a professor who totally changed my mind. And I was introduced to Pedagogy of the Oppressed and the idea of information literacy instruction in academic libraries. I'm sure most people have heard about, the phrase information literacy, because it's everywhere right now, especially kind of right now in the wake of the fake news crisis and all of the things that have started coming out about the storming of the Capitol on the 6th of January. It's like, all of this thing about misinformation and disinformation, and where we are as a country in terms of information. I think it's being talked about a lot more, but librarians have been talking about this for a while because it's really how academic libraries see their role in academia, kind of in the digital environment. And so I think discovering information literacy, but then also discovering partially through Freire, but then also through other wonderful writers, I kind of realized that I really liked the possibilities of teaching information literacy in higher education, in a kind of a college setting, specifically because it is such a powerful kind of intersection of where students are with information and the kinds of things they're asked to do. There's so many possibilities for learning and growth and expansion, and doing the kinds of things that Freire talks about in terms of kind of liberatory experiences in the classroom. It's a really great space for that. So that was kind of, and so I guess I sort of credit Freire with veering me off a little bit, or switching my interest from public libraries to academic libraries, and here I am.
Well, that's cool. I think we talked about this off recording, off camera. I want to say off camera because it makes me feel like I'm on TV. We talked about this off camera when we were prepping for this, but I think your background is very dope. Can I say dope?
Sure.
Okay. Dope. Everyone knows when I say dope, I don't mean illegal substance. I think your background is very dope in the sense of you're in a very important field, information literacy. Your passion for it is, palpable, and you've used it in ways to help people, right? You working in the college, me working in the college, working in higher ed. We know plenty of people, not just in our field, but everywhere, who they use what they do to advance themselves. It's purely a selfish mission, but your introduction into your field was one of helping people and helping decrease the digital divide. And I mean, I don't think you can find a better purpose in life. So I think that's really dope, back to being dope. So
I agree. And, being a book nerd, libraries are awesome spaces for it. And it's also, I love talking to students and getting to interact with students in this, in the kind of setting of a library. It's you don't get to do that too many other places.
Yeah, and that's great. That really is great. So my background and connection with the book isn't as cool as yours, but ironically, it starts around the same timeline. So I read the book for the first time in 2018. And as a book lover, you know how it is. You have a book that's been so popular for so long, I almost feel guilty to say I started that late. All right. I first picked up Pedagogy in 2018 and read it in full. But in 2018, I read it. Of course, I heard so much about it. We all did beforehand. But at that time, it resonated so well and connected with me in such a way because starting in 2016, I began teaching Black history classes at the Cook County Jail in Chicago. And I was teaching them to men who were pre-trial detainees. They had been charged with the crime, and they were either they couldn't post bail, or they were in trial, or they were waiting to be shipped to a penitentiary. And I taught there actually from 2016 until March of 2020, when the pandemic hit. And I'm sorry, that's my son in the background. And I taught
he's adding to the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. He's bringing much more color. He's much more personality than I have. But I started teaching there in 2016 and was forced to stop in 2020. So for 4 straight years, I taught there, and I loved it. I taught 12 months out the year, 52 weeks out the year, unless it was an emergency. But 52 weeks out the year, I was there. And when I read Pedagogy of the Oppressed and thought about the concepts that it talked about in terms of how education has been delivered in this country to this point, and what should be done differently in order to make it better. It instantly made sense to me because I was dealing with a population of men who self-admittedly did not enjoy school, many of whom did not complete school. The high school dropout rate for incarcerated Black men, which majority of my students were Black men, is well over 60 to 70%. And we often talked about what we didn't like in school, but I was teaching a class and they really took to my class. I loved it. It is the best educational environment I've ever been in. It's inside of teaching in the jail for 4 years. The best teaching, best classroom ever. But in reading Pedagogy in 2018, I took it to heart and tried to take the things that Freire talked about in the book and bring it to my classroom in the jail. And it really made me sharpen my craft as a teacher in that sense. And I think it worked. I really think it worked. And, we're going to get into the concepts of the book, but I think the things that are pointed out in the points that are made in the book, I think it worked in that setting of a Cook County jail with a group of men who did not like school, did not do well in school ever, but they did fantastically in my class. And I enjoyed delivering the class. So that's my orientation to the book. And that's why no matter what, it'll always, be a special text in my library. So.
I mean, Dewitt, that just, the first time you told me like that story, I was just like, I was blown away. Like
off
that
camera, when we were off camera.
Yeah, there we go. And I'm blown away again. Just that that sounds like such an impactful experience for you and the students and your students. And that's just, gosh, it makes my heart go a little bit like, I don't know. It's the library nerd just is like, oh, that sounds amazing.
It really was. I haven't been back in a year because of COVID, but as soon as, we find a solution, I'm going right back every week. So, yeah.
Oh, well, okay. We want to talk a little bit. We were going to talk about kind of general, like the world at large, like the larger world in 2018, like when this was kind of coming to us. Or like you mentioned, we can talk a little bit about some of the concepts of the book that are really like big takeaways. I don't know. Yeah. What's your preference?
Well, I think takeaways will be good, and connecting takeaways to our current reality.
Okay, cool.
Okay. So I'll let you start. You tell me, what you siphon from the book as the most important or most salient concepts in, today. Well,
okay. So one of the biggest things for me was that, Freire, so he introduces this concept called the banking model of education, right? Where students are empty vessels to be filled by the knowledge that their teachers possess. So it creates this dichotomy in the classroom, like we're in classrooms where that kind of dynamic is present. It's this expert and not expert. It's this very binary kind of thing. It's like, you know something or you don't know it, which, I mean, that's, but so one of the things that Freire does is he says, no, wait, that's not actually the thing. Students bring lived experience and hopes and dreams and fears and, their whole selves into the classroom. And so they're not blank slates. And so he's and that, in order to engage authentically, you have like teachers have to acknowledge that and interact with students on that level of the, we bring our whole selves into the classroom. And it's kind of breaking the, I think he uses the phrase sage on the stage in terms of, teachers are usually like up at the front of the classroom, talk, like that. The teacher in Charlie Brown, just like dot. And that's always been my really big takeaway. Like, how can I not be a sage on the stage? How can I be a partner? How can I partner with students to to learn things, and to grow in a classroom. Like that's, if I could like distill what I want to do with students, it's like, learn from each other, and I'll be a little bit further along maybe when we leave the classroom. And I draw that almost directly from Freire.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? What were some like of your big takeaways?
So obviously the banking model, which is really the core of the book, was a big part of it. But for me, in addition to that, I came away with the idea of sort of making the educational content relevant to the everyday lives of the student. Because, in connection with the banking concept, this whole idea of just, I'm going to pour information into the students. The other side of that is much of this information is being delivered in such a way that it doesn't really resonate with the everyday experience. And I think about, first and foremost, my experience with education. As a kid, I was never a bad student. I always did my work and things like that, but I was never a great student. I didn't particularly enjoy the academic side of school. I loved the social side. I was very social. And I was an athlete, so I had a reason to stay there the entire day, because practice was after school. But the classroom, I just didn't. And you don't realize it until you become older. And then, I went into education. So I think about it differently. But much of what we did in the classroom just didn't resonate. It just didn't resonate with me. So it wasn't interesting. So when Freire talks about using education as a tool for students to transform the world that they're in, before you can even transform it, you have to understand, what world it is that you have inhabited or that you've inherited. And education at its best does that, right? It helps you understand who you are and your relation to the world around you. And when you think about pedagogy, sort of highlighting that idea, and then you think about the way education is delivered today, and you say, I see the disconnect, right? I can see the disconnect in my own education. I can see the disconnect between the men in my class at the county jail and the education that they had before they came to the county jail. I'm sorry, that's my door. So I understand it slightly differently. Okay, Pooh. I know. Shh. Can you be quiet? Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's actually the biggest thing that I took away. Making the educational content relevant to the lives of the students, whoever those students are, wherever they come from. It has to tie into their everyday experience. If not, you run the risk of losing them, or you run the risk of creating these robotic students who, of course, can memorize and regurgitate, but they can't apply anything to their everyday lives. So,
and I mean, that's something that always struck me too. It's like the power of education is that you're giving people the tools to go out and make the world better, right? Mm-hmm. To change the world in the ways that they think that it should be changed, and just the kind of the pouring information into someone's head doesn't give them the skills to do that necessarily. It's like,
right.
So it's kind of like getting at like, what is the point of education, right? The point of education is to be able to be an actor in the world, and to make change in positive ways, hopefully. Yeah. No, and actually,
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
But no, actually, and there was particular passages from the book. When a book is great when it has so many different editions. Right? Yep. You held up yours, and I was like, I've never seen that cover, right? As compared to mine, right? I mean, this is a book that's just been reprinted over and over. So, thinking about that when I, was preparing for this, you can't even really give a page number because everybody's edition is different, right? So I'll say, particularly in chapter 2, which was the chapter that really just opened up my eyes in a certain way. There is a particular statement or a particular sentence here that always caught me every time I review it, right? And it says, liberation is a praxis, the action and reflection of men and women upon the world in order to transform it, right? And the idea of liberation is a praxis. I always thought of in the sense that education done properly is liberation, right? It's liberation. Sort of helping people reflect upon their world so they can transform it, right? That should be, or in my opinion, that should be the entire goal of, I don't care if it's infants like her, right? Or if you're talking about a doctoral program, the idea, or anything in between, the idea is the students are there to learn so that they can take what they've learned to transform the world, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that they think the world is bad at the moment, right? Or they think that it's great, whatever the world may be, it can always transform for the better, right? So those sort of statements, and they're literally throughout the book. You can see why this book is so revolutionary, and why so many people hold it in such regard, whether you're in education or not, right? Whether you're in education or not. But that's just, I have plenty of those that I can point out in the book. So I'll say that one, then I'll let you have your chance.
Gosh, I don't know if I picked out specific quotes.
No, that's fine.
Oh, I wasn't that organized. You got one up on me there.
No, it's okay.
That's okay. I guess I do. I guess it's one of my questions for you, I guess. Since we both, we're both in higher ed, we both have experience teaching in higher ed and in other places. I guess, what are your hopes for higher education, or like community colleges specifically, as, sites of liberation? I don't know.
Oh no, go ahead. You can. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No. Go.
No, that's a very good question. So I've always held high hopes for higher education to sort of be that vessel of proper education, what I call proper education, transformative education. But I think in higher education, the community college is the most democratic institution of them all, right? Four-year universities are great. Some are better than others, much like two-year universities, some are better than others, right? But typically with the four-year university, in America at least, it's almost hard not to fall into the elitism, right? And, if you work in higher education, or if you have children who are in college, or you've been to college, whatever it may be, you understand the hierarchy of American higher education, right? You understand what Harvard is. You understand what an Ivy League sits as compared to a local regional university or college, right? You know what people think of a particular degree. You know what people think of degreed people, right? So I've always hoped that we can have higher education institutions that do more than that, particularly the community college, right? The community college is about the student who is there to prepare themselves for the 4-year, or who is coming to get a certain skill for a certain industry, or someone who is juggling a lot of life challenges or situations, whether it be parenting, whether it be jobs and careers. So the 2 years is normally this hodgepodge of people who come together for so many different reasons. No. I'm sorry. They come together for so many different reasons. So you see it as almost a golden opportunity to get all of these people from different corners of life to come together and find ways to feed off each other and off the information of the instructor to make everything better, or to help transform the world. So I always have high hopes, and that won't change for me. I think community colleges will be able to do that, and some are doing it better than others. But that's where I stand. My hopes are very high for that. I don't see that. Put it this way, I have higher hopes for the 2-year college doing that than I do for 4-year colleges, plain and simple, especially when you start to add in the cost of a 4-year college education now. I mean, it's,
it's really interesting that I love that you described it as kind of a hodgepodge. Because like I've been starting to think about community colleges that way, like, or in like, what makes them really special to me, in that like it's people who are, their one similarity is that they're in this, geographic area, and that doesn't, they don't necessarily have anything else in common, which isn't necessarily true for like other 4-year, like if you go away to school to a 4-year college, you're not going to get, I don't know, it's a different thing. And I feel like I really agree with you that there's something powerful in people coming together because they're in the same place. And it, I feel like it really speaks to, Freire's like, the idea of, you have to have like, he calls it dialogue, I think, but like, coming to different people with different perspectives and experiences and understandings coming together to work on the same issues or problems together. And that coming together and working to understand is where it is part of the liberatory transformative process. And it feels like, community colleges are a place where that are almost like made for that to happen.
Yeah.
When they're, in the ideal.
Yes, I agree. In the ideal. And I think there are a lot of educators who work at community colleges who are committed to that idea. And in the 2-year, you just don't have as much bureaucratic bloat. And so many other different. I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm sorry. This is my daughter. Yeah, you don't have so many of those administrative layers to fight through. Although you do have some, but I see more opportunity at the 2-year in order to enact a Freire type of way of education. So that's my long-winded answer to your question. But moving forward from that, I have my question for you.
Okay.
Right? And my question is centered around your role in information literacy. And what are your ideas of how we can use information literacy or library work to sort of disrupt the banking model of education that Freire speaks of?
I like this question. Okay. Okay, so kind of to get into this, it's like, okay, so a little bit of library history, right? Because if we're talking about information literacy from the perspective of a librarian, it's based on library history, right? So we now consider information literacy in libraries, but the kind of the what it is, so some of the things that are included in information literacy used to be called something called bibliographic instruction. And essentially it was how to use the library to do research, right? So that was that. That's simplifying. That's absolutely simplifying what bibliographic instruction was. Absolutely, I'm simplifying. I acknowledge this. But kind of post, after everything started going digital, so starting in like the late 90s, librarians really started to pivot to considering not just like how to do research through the library, but like considering wanting to get into students and ask them to consider with students and ask them to consider, what is information and how is information used to construct knowledge and how does that relate to research? So that really has kind of shaped that transition from the physical library to the digital, and with the increasing accessibility of information in digital formats has really reshaped how librarians approach this. I guess that's kind of, I don't know that, okay. So that's kind of, that shapes how I approach this. Cause I came into this from the library perspective. Like that's what I learned. But I think what I'm really interested in is talking through with students, or examining with students, how do you encounter information in your everyday life, and how is that something that you can use in your experience in higher education? I'm really big on, things that you learn here, you should be able to transfer and use elsewhere. So I don't, it's hard to do this because mostly, when librarians are teaching people or teaching students something, usually we sit down with them for like an hour, right? And we get an hour with students to get them to where they need to be to finish a research paper, right? Or do the research they need to do. So it's it's kind of this is always a race against the clock for librarians, but it's in the current like information environment, everyone can be a creator of information. Everyone has the agency to do that. And what if I could, there are some libraries, there are some places in higher education where librarians get to teach like semester-long information literacy classes. And I just I read about those and I'm like, oh.
Like, how can I be that person?
Sign me up.
Yeah.
Doing really deep dives into, I think trying to help students position themselves, like, they as information creators, but then also in this larger environment of everyone else who's an information creator. And what does that mean? And how do we navigate this? And, bringing in kind of Freire, how can understanding this and harnessing the power of the internet, basically, how can you be a positive force in the world? Whether it's, on a small scale, like being able to make good informed decisions for yourself or your family, or whether it's, on a larger scale of helping to change things for thousands or millions of people. It's but that, the idea of, we all have agency around information in a digital world, but how much of that do we actually understand, and how can we harness that? I guess did that answer your question? I feel like I got a little off topic.
I mean, so none of it was off topic, that's for sure. And you did answer the question, and you actually, you opened up more questions for me, which is great. Specifically, that position that you said of librarians who teach information literacy for a semester long. I didn't know that was a thing.
It is.
It really sounds great. And now I'm interested in, now I'm thinking about what are ways Hannah can do that. Not just at Moraine Valley, but maybe other places. Because this something that sounds great, and then you're passionate about it. Like, those things have to come together, right? So that's a great answer. Great answer.
Well, I'm glad.
Yeah. So, but I don't. Should we move to another question? You want to ask me one?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, is there I guess kind of keep it open-ended a little bit. Is there anything else you want to talk more about? Or is there something that you would want to talk about that we haven't yet?
So, as a guy who talks all the time, I absolutely have more that I can talk about. But specifically another passage, or not passage, but statement that sort of I connect as important. What we talk about in terms of relevancy to the student or the audience, right? Freire, in chapter 2, he says the teacher talks about reality as if it were motionless, static, compartmentalized, and predictable. Or else he, of course, when this was written, gender politics or what they were, everyone was a he. Or else he expounds on a topic completely alien to the existential experience of the students. His task is to fill the students with the contents of his narration, contents which are detached from reality, disconnected from the totality that engendered them, and could give them significance. So when talking about topics that are disconnected from the student, particularly as, again, for me, I'm a CPS graduate, Chicago Public Schools graduate. I live in the city of Chicago, always have. So living as a Southside kid, going to school, getting, educational content, and then having to at 2:30 or 3:30 leave the building to go back home, like none of it really helped or really connected with my everyday life. Hence why I wasn't very interested, and I was a mediocre student. But as I've gotten older now and have transformed obviously into a book nerd, I think about all of that differently. And right, the question for me was, well, what happened between my years in school up until now? I'm in my 30s. What happened now that transformed me into someone who really is deeply into learning? And now as an adult, I have control over my curriculum, right? And by curriculum, I mean what I learn. I have complete control over it. So I get a chance to go to bookstores or search podcasts or look at videos and documentaries that I know contains information that I want to understand, right? That is so powerful when you have a student who has autonomy and control of their curriculum, right? And with that, right, so of course I'm going to drag in a number of books here, right? This book here, right, it's called The Classroom in the Cell. It's written by Mark Lamont Hill and Mumia Abu-Jamal. Mark Lamont Hill now, this is Mark. Mark Lamont Hill now is a professor at Temple University. Mumia Abu-Jamal actually is a political prisoner who is doing life in prison. But The Classroom in the Cell, and in this book, it's a dialogue, right? Every chapter is a dialogue, right? And I'll even put up to the camera, you can see where you see Mumia's name and Mark's name, and they're having a conversation, right? And I think I read this book for the first time, I was in my late 20s, but I never understood a book that had a dialogue like this, right? When we're introduced to books as children, the only dialogue, they happen sort of quotation marks, or they tell a story, which is fine. But as we get older and we get into teenage years, the only dialogue books I ever came across was Shakespeare, right? And Shakespeare, and I no disrespect, I'm sure some Shakespeareans out there that love Shakespeare and got tattoos of Shakespeare on their back and all of that. I just couldn't do it. I didn't like it. But now I came across this book, and these two guys, they are having conversations about topics that I really care about, and they're speaking back and forth throughout the book. It makes me feel like I'm in a room with these two guys, just a fly on the wall. That sort of learning, for me, was just it opened up another door. And when I walked through that door, I saw all these other doors that made me so anxious. And I was like, well, I have to check out everything, right? And it's a Third World Press book, published by Third World Press, one of my favorite. And then connected to that, right, there's a book here written by Jawanza Kunjufu. It's called Understanding Black Male Learning Styles. And as an adult, what Dr. Kunjufu points out is that there's a difference in the way that Black boys learn as compared to everyone else, right? An idea I never thought of until I got older. And the things that he says really, really resonate with me in the book. And now I apply these things in any educational delivery that I do. But one of the things I like about he talks about in this book, which is connected to Freire, is he talks about when you're dealing with young Black boys, particularly those who are uninterested in school, tie the educational content to their professional aspiration, right? So tell them or ask them, what is it that you want to be? Maybe they want to be a plumber. Maybe they want to be a dancer. Maybe they want to be a lawyer. Find some sort of way to tie the English, the math, the science classes to bring it to their professional aspiration, right? You have them locked with interest and they can learn more. And now I tried to do that, but that ties to the relevancy. Yeah. Right? That ties to Freire's relevancy. You have to make it relevant. And step one in making it relevant is giving some autonomy to the student over their learning. Obviously, it's on a scale, right? Like my daughter, she's 1. I can't give her full autonomy because she's going to color on the walls, right? But when you're dealing, you give maybe a small amount at 1 or 5 or 6, then by the time they're 17, I understand you have standards and you have the Common Core and all those other things. But even in the higher ed, right? Those first 2 years typically are the gen eds, and we know statistically that's where we lose most of our students.
Yeah.
Because they haven't gotten to their major. And then how many of us, myself included, how many of us who finished college know people who made it to their major, got into their major and said, I don't like this major. Right? Yeah, I've done it.
Yeah.
So now you're in year 3 or year 4 of your undergrad, and you're like, I might as well finish. And then you go to a graduate school with a totally different major. Maybe you could have covered some of that ground in the first semester or 2 or 3. So I'm trying to be conscious of not being a Mormon, running my mouth off.
I always think like one of my overall, like my overarching beliefs as a teacher, I guess a librarian teacher, is that things that have personal, that connect personally are more meaningful, right? So if a student like chooses, is able to choose a topic that is meaningful to them, they're gonna dig deeper. It's gonna and it's gonna be the kind of thing that it's not just gonna end with them turning a paper in, right? Which is so like, there are gonna be ripples that go out in their life, and like that. That feels to me like where the impact is. If you can, so I feel like it has to be personal. It has to. Okay, and so I brought my own. Okay, so
Okay.
I decided to down Dewitt a little bit and bring a couple other books. But okay, so I started out with Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and I kind of did a dive into critical pedagogy, and that kind of led me to feminist pedagogy, and that led me to Bell Hooks.
Oh, good one.
Who is, it's Bell Hooks.
It's Bell Hooks. All right, what can you say? It's like Bell Hooks. No introduction needed.
I mean, that's kind of like, yeah, exactly. Like, what can I say about Bell Hooks? I don't know that I could do justice in anything to any. Yeah. But I think from Bell Hooks, I really I have kind of dug a little bit deeper into the idea of what we all bring to the classroom is from us, from our lived experience, from the things that our parents lived, that we saw in our communities growing up. We bring them into the classroom, and they're a way to help everyone else learn. Like collectively, we are greater than we are individually. And that in a learning environment, being able, if you can create that kind of space and get the vibe going, it's like that's an incredibly powerful kind of thing. I have to admit, I had one instructor, I think, who did a really good job with this, and where I felt it, even though it was in undergrad and I didn't know like what was going on, but looking back.
Isn't that great? You look back like, you know what, that really was cool in my life 15 years ago, or for you 4 years ago.
No.
But that's great when you have that light bulb moment like way later. Yeah.
Okay, well, we've been talking for 40 minutes.
Okay. Well, I do want to piggyback off of the last one. And we talked about it before, but I forgot that you were going to go to Bell Hooks. So, but I still, even in connect them with that, right? Another book connected to the entire topic, but I think is great building off that, is this book is called The Feminist Bookstore Movement, right? Written by Kristen Hogan, right? Now, this book I mean, I loved it. Knocked it out when I read it. And so just in a book lovers off the topic, what makes this book so cool, it came in a plastic, like this plastic cover. Like when you buy a DVD at the store or something, like it wasn't a traditional book. When you get it off the bookshelf, it's in plastic. You can't open it. I know, right? And I bought it, and I had heard great things about it. But so Bell Hooks with Critical Pedagogy, right? She's known for that. More so in pop culture, or people who may not read her often, she's really known for feminism, right? And she ties in the two in her book, right? The feminist bookstore movement talks about the creation of feminist bookstores in America, right? Feminist-based bookstores. They all throughout the country, many of them prevalent on the West Coast, but the idea that there is a intellectual space for predominantly women, but non-women who are interested in feminist praxis, gender studies, sexuality studies, and these things. You can come somewhere, not only get materials and text to learn these things, but also it was a space for organizing, right? And the bookstore itself becomes a classroom, right? Which ties into Freire and all that we're saying about relevancy and getting away from the banking model. The idea, and we're doing it now with this video, the classroom can be anywhere, right? And you and I, we created a classroom here today on this video, right? The feminist bookstore was created essentially as a classroom. You know, vendors or patrons can come and not only buy books, but they can get everything they need intellectually, emotionally, socially, all in this one space, right? It wasn't just sitting at a desk and listening to the sage on the stage. It was about sharing and learning in a comfortable place that you want to go to all the time. So, you know, when you mention Bell Hooks, there's no way I could not mention this book and the idea of the bookstore, particularly here, the feminist bookstore being a classroom where students study who they are, their relationship to the world, and their responsibility to transform the world. So
that is so cool. I've never read that book, but I want to now.
You have to. It's great. It's great. And the tagline, so it's feminist bookstore movement tagline, lesbian anti-racism and feminist accountability.
Yeah.
Fantastic book. Fantastic book.
Well, that kind of leaves me at a thing where, like, you know, so kind of making spaces where you can learn and grow and not just have needs met in different ways. Like, I feel like, I guess that's kind of one of my hopes for libraries and for like places like community colleges, where they can, even though they are traditional classrooms, that they can be more than that too. I guess that's kind of where I go. It's like, I hope that, you know, we can make the library into something. I hope that libraries can embody that in some small way. Yeah,
that would be great. And like I said, with my practice in prison or in jail, I look at the prison as the same way, right? I would like for the prison to be an educational environment, a constructive educational environment. You know, in the same way that you see the library, right? Why does it have to stop at the classroom? The library should be its own classroom, right? The prison or the jail should be its own classroom. A Zoom meeting can be its own classroom, right? I mean, even like your background, my background, these are our homes, but these are libraries, right? These are libraries. You have a library behind you. I have a library behind me. And if it's a library, it could be a classroom, right? And then that's, you know, and no matter where you go or who you trace education back to, the best of the educators thought in that manner, whether it's Freire, whether it's Dewey, whether it's, you know, Du Bois, right? I'm sorry, I got another one. Whether it's Carter G. Woodson, right? One of his most famous book, Miseducation of the Negro, which really is the closest book I've ever read to Freire, right? In the sense that Miseducation of the Negro, what Carter G. Woodson says throughout the book is that, which I'm sorry, I'm all over the place, but the book was originally published in 1933, right? So we're talking about a book that's almost 100 years old.
Yeah.
And what he says in the book is that African Americans who are privileged enough to get college education, formal education, they get an education that is not pertinent to their everyday African-American life and community. So they graduate from college at this time, which is predominantly HBCUs. They graduate from college and then they come back home with this knowledge that does not apply to their community. And they now are not able to help their own community. Instead, they help the communities that are different than them because they've been taught in a way that fits those communities better than their own, right? Lack of relevancy, the need for relevancy, right? This all about the relevancy, right? And nothing more, I mean, understanding Black male learning styles, relevant to Black male life, the culturally relevant education, right? You can't stress it enough, but yeah, I could just go on and on about this. No, I'm sorry, African-centered education, right? Another book, right? Cultural relevancy. I can do this all day. So.
Okay, well, I think we need to agree to try and do something like this again, make it a thing, because this was fun.
Yes. We can. I would enjoy that. Creating another classroom experience on our Zoom conversations.
Awesome, I love it. Okay. Well, I guess if you've made it this far and listened to all of this, thank you for listening to us. I'm Hannah Carlton, here with Dewitt Scott. And we both think that you should go out and read Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Yes, read it more than once, study it, live with it, and, draw your own conclusions.
Spread it out into the world.
Yes, it will do nothing but make the world better.
There we go. Okay.